As a kid, I really loved reading. It was something of an escape for me, in fact. I'd spend hours of my days with my nose stuck in a book. It was my lifeline from the humdrum. As I got older, though, reading became uncool, and so, in an effort to assimilate with my incredibly cool peers, I stopped. On one humid summer day when I was 16, I decided to try and get over myself and finally indulge in my old hobby once again. I bought Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami on a whim, knowing nothing about the plot or the author himself. I just recognized its name as also being the name of one of my favorite songs by the Beatles, which was good enough for me. I read the first 20 pages, got bored, and stored it away in my bookshelf. Maybe I was right about how demo day reading was, after all. A few weeks later, though, I decided to give the book another chance. Not because I was quenched for a good read or anything, but because I had spent $20 on it and I wanted to get my money's worth. But I was pleasantly surprised by how much I liked Murakami's prose. I found his observations about the mundane insightful and refreshing. Reading his work felt like living life from a new perspective. As I made my way through the book, I became enthralled by the 1960s Tokyo that he wrote of, and I felt myself resonating deeply with the plight of the main character, Toru Watanabe. Throughout Norwegian Wood, Toru is forced to reckon with his lack of an established identity. For me, that hit close to home. Developing an identity is a quintessential, persistent facet of the human experience. For my entire life, I have felt uncertain about my identity, which has left me in a perpetual state of worrying about whether the version of myself that I project to others is real or not. Murakami's poignant depiction of this anxiety inspired me to read some of his other works for my senior project. In the end, I chose his novels Kafka on the Shore and Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. In reading them, I hope to find a clear answer to one question that I had while reading Norwegian Wood. Is one doomed to be a certain person? Unsurprisingly, Murakami doesn't give a simple yes or no answer. By exploring themes surrounding the power of one's subconscious and the development of their identity, he ultimately suggests to his audience that the self exists on a spectrum. Identity fluctuates, and it isn't bound to fate. Before providing an analysis of how the two books I read answer my essential question, I would like to present you all with some information about Murakami himself. Haruki Murakami was born in Kyoto, Japan on January 12, 1949. All of his novels and short stories were originally written in Japanese, but have been translated in over 50 different languages, including English. Murakami's trademark is his usage of magical realism in his work. He highlights the abnormal found within the normal. Because of his style, Murakami is a polarizing literary figure among the Japanese public, whose members tend to prefer more heavy-handed storytelling. However, he is adored internationally, and Americans in particular enjoy the references to popular culture he makes in his literature. Evidently so, as his allusion to the Beatles was what sold me on him in the first place. Kafka on the Shore is regarded as being one of Murakami's most influential novels. The book chronicles 15-year-old Kafka Tomoda's experience running away from his home in Tokyo, Japan, and concurrently the experiences of mentally disabled septuagenarian Satoru Nakata, who escapes from the same city after murdering Kafka's father. At the beginning of his journey, Kafka is portrayed to suffer from having an incredibly fractured sense of identity. When his mother and sister left him and his father as a child, Kafka felt abandoned, lost. As a result, he spent his formative years building the mental and physical strength to flee from his abusive father, who had taunted him with an Oedipal prophecy throughout his childhood. When he leaves home, he meets a variety of characters that mirror his absent sister and mother. These include a young hairstylist named Sakura, and the middle-aged librarian of the library which he stays at, Miss Psyche. Nakata, the book's secondary protagonist, is also depicted to have had an uncertain identity from early childhood. After being in a mysterious accident when he was a child, Nakata was rendered hollow. Following it, he lost all of his memories and never fully regained his mental facilities. Unlike Kafka, Nakata is guided by his supernatural abilities and his illogical premonitions regarding the existence of another world, and is unconcerned with regaining what he has lost. After murdering Kafka's father, he coincidentally travels to the same place where Kafka ends up, seeking out an opening to another world he refers to as an entrance stone. Switching back and forth between its two protagonist perspectives, Kafka on the Shore prompts readers to think about the agency that one has over their lives and their development as an individual. The ethereal and ambiguous events of the novel imply to readers that the existence of one's fate and purpose is entirely subjective, but is all the more likely to be fulfilled if one develops a fixation on it. If one believes that they will remain the person they are in the present for the rest of their life, they very well may. Such is the power of the subconscious. In order to enhance my understanding of Murakami's style and the content of the book itself, I read a variety of analyses from academic journals that featured relevant musings on Kafka on the Shore. The most significant of which were Time and Timelessness, a study of narrative structure in Murakami Haruki's Kafka on the Shore by Virginia Young, The Name Kafka, Evocation and Resistance in Haruki Murakami's Kafka on the Shore by Betty L. Wasihun, and In Dreams Begins Responsibility, an interview with Haruki Murakami with Jonathan Ellis, Mitoko Hirabayashi, and Haruki Murakami. All offered compelling interpretations of the novel, though the essay by Virginia Young provided an analysis of it which was most consistent with my own views, while also featuring new ideas that enriched my understanding. Young eventually concludes that Kafka on the Shore is not a story that affirms the overpowering nature of fate or humankind's powerlessness. On the contrary, a strong sense of fatalism is imbued into the work to give an intense and dramatic presentation of the perennial struggle between fate and humankind's free will. Here, Young asserts that one has the ability, the will, to change their fate, but is nonetheless subject to the anxiety that humans do not truly have any freedom over their actions. The presence of such anxiety does not take away from one's agency, however. In the end, it is up to the individual to determine who they become in the future, and by rejecting fatalism, Kafka is able to develop into a strong-willed individual with a more solid grasp on his identity. Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World is a bifurcated sci-fi story which explores themes regarding one's memory and identity. In Hard-Boiled Wonderland, readers are introduced to a cyberpunk version of Tokyo in which its narrator, a nameless 35-year-old Calcutech, is told by an old professor that he has but 48 hours until an experiment conducted on his mind will cause him to live inside his subconscious forever. Contrastingly, The End of the World shows off the narrator's unconscious mind, taking place in a small, isolated town in which residents have lost their memory of their lives prior to their arrival. Like in Kafka on the Shore, the two narratives occur in the same time frame as one another. As the narrator reaches the end of his life in the former, he approaches the start of a mind-numbing eternity in the latter. In the real world, he spends the rest of his life anticipating his doom, while inside of his mind, he seems to assimilate to life in the town. He cannot access his memories of the outside world, as his shadow representing his concept of self has been torn away from him. In spite of his shadow urging him to escape, the narrator eventually succumbs to the town and is thus stuck there forever. Though Kafka on the Shore and Hard-Boiled Wonderland and The End of the World may seem rather different based on summary alone, there are actually several parallels between the two books. Murakami's usage of perspective within them, for example, remains virtually the same. He alternates between two different narratives in each book, with one supporting details from the other and vice versa. The books also bear thematic similarities to one another. The protagonist of Kafka on the Shore, Kafka Tamura, is forced to reckon with his anxieties regarding his identity prompted by his subconscious. By the story's conclusion, he's able to accept the impact of his mother and sister abandoning him as part of himself, and is thus able to develop the concrete sense of self which he was missing prior to embarking on his journey away from home. Likewise, the narrator of Hard-Boiled Wonderland and The End of the World grapples with the consuming emptiness that reality has left him with as he delves into the world of his subconscious. Ironically, the loss of his outside life doesn't end up affecting him very much, since he's finally able to explore the person that he is internally after years of repression. In the end, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and The End of the World urges readers to contemplate how the external world of the self differs from the internal world of the self. Its content suggests that one's reality and one's subconscious can be completely dissimilar. The different narratives in the book represent the duality of the self. In Hard-Boiled Wonderland, the protagonist's decisions during his last days on Earth are driven by his logical and analytic thinking, while in The End of the World, he is completely free to explore his imagination and emotions. This highlights the contrast between the external world of the self, which is rational and scientific, and the internal world of the self, which is intuitive and creative. Given the restrictions on individuality existing in the outside world, the two can coexist without ever influencing one another, explaining their stark differences. It is thus apt to proclaim that the self exists on a spectrum. People are inherently multifaceted, and it is presumptuous to attempt to reduce something as complex as self-concept to something that is easy for one to understand. Reading Murakami's ruminations about identity within his works has been as cathartic as it has been distressing for me. Cathartic because I identify with them, and distressing because I identify with them. This has prompted a lot of introspection for me, which has been difficult but nonetheless necessary. Murakami's philosophy about the self has become part of my own philosophy, I'd say. From his ideas, I have begun to attempt to accept all of myself, even the dark and flawed parts. Though I've also realized that I'm not doomed to be a certain way. It doesn't matter if I like myself at the moment or not. My identity is capable of evolving. Within me, there is a version of myself that reflects the person that I want to be. It's scary to not be there yet, and I know that there is room for improvement, but it would be scarier to believe that I wasn't capable of changing. I'm not a monolith. Neither is Toru or Kafka or the nameless middle-aged Calcutech. We exist to grow, and we are not bound by fate.